They laughed when she walked past, whispered when she sat down, called her the quota pick before she'd even opened her mouth. To them, she was just a shadow in the corner, another black intern they could dismiss with a smirk and crush under corporate routine. She didn't protest when they gave her janitorial tasks, didn't flinch when they called her aggressive for speaking with clarity. She watched, she listened, and every time they mocked her behind her back or directly to her face, she made a silent note. Because what they didn't know, what none of them even considered for a second, was that she wasn't just watching them for survival. She was watching them for a reason. And the man who humiliated her the most? He was standing inches from a fall, so hard it would echo across the entire building. This is a story of arrogance meeting truth, of privilege collapsing under its own weight. Want to know how it ends? Like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. What would you have done in her place? Let's hear it. The day the summer internship program began at Danvers Rex Global, the sleek marble lobby gleamed under fluorescent lights, humming with the clipped heels and polished loafers of rising talent. Clusters of interns waited by the elevators, clutching onboarding packets and swapping nervous glances. Among them stood Sable Morton, calm, still, and self-contained. She wore a fitted blazer the color of storm clouds, crisp slacks, and a blouse that complemented her deep skin tone with a quiet elegance. Her dark curls were pulled into a low bun. Her expression was composed, her back straight, and in her silence there was a kind of gravity, the kind that made people either uncomfortable or curious. Most looked past her. A few gave the tight-lipped smile reserved for politeness without welcome. None approached. By 8:15 a.m., the interns were herded into the orientation suite, a glass-walled room on the second floor just outside the executive wing. The program director, a woman named Leslie in pearls and navy pumps, gave a brief welcome before handing them off to their assigned departments. Sable's folder had been marked strategic planning, with Brent Callahan's name scribbled next to it. Leslie's smile faltered just a bit when she read the assignment aloud, then recovered quickly. Mr. Callahan's department is just down the hall. He'll be eager to meet you. She didn't sound convinced. Sable thanked her, picked up her slim black bag, and made her way down the corridor. The hallway was modern and spare, lined with frosted glass offices and muted artwork. She moved with purpose, her steps soft but certain. She reached the door marked Brent Callahan, Director, Strategic Planning, and raised her hand to knock. The door was slightly ajar, so she peeked inside. Brent was leaning back in his chair, feet crossed on the desk, scrolling through his phone. He looked up, squinting. "Maintenance closet's that way," he said, jerking his thumb toward the utility room at the end of the hall. Sable blinked. "I'm not maintenance. I'm the intern assigned to your team, Sable Morton." Brent stared for a beat too long, then barked a laugh. "You're kidding." He looked her up and down, then scoffed. "They really let anyone in these days, huh?" He stood and walked toward her, blocking the doorway. "You wandered into the executive zone, sweetheart. This area's for staff." Sable didn't flinch. "I was told to report here. I'm part of your department." Brent smirked, voice louder now. "We've got a dress code, not a street code. I suggest you fix that before people start making assumptions." His words echoed through the hallway. A group of interns passing by stopped and stared. One of them chuckled nervously. Another looked away. Sable's cheeks flushed, but she didn't speak. Brent finally stepped aside. "Fine. You want to sit in, you can shadow the interns from ops. Third desk by the copier. Try not to get in the way." He turned back into his office without another word. She walked down the corridor in silence, heels muffled against the carpet, and took her seat next to a stack of toner cartridges. The desk was dusty. The chair wobbled. No one greeted her. Throughout the morning, Brent ran several small onboarding meetings with the interns, excluding Sable each time. She watched through the glass as he handed out case packets, assigned them projects, and gave overconfident lectures about workplace culture. She was never called in. At one point, he passed by her desk and tossed a packet in her direction. "This is just background reading. Don't worry about the project stuff. It's a little complex." He winked. "I'm sure you'll catch up eventually." Then he walked off, laughing with Trevor, a senior analyst with a smug grin and hair that always looked just gelled. Later that afternoon, as Sable tried to access her company email, she found her credentials didn't work. She flagged it to IT, who said they had no request on file for her access. When she asked Brent for help, he waved her off. "You don't need email to read a PDF, do you?" he said, not looking up from his laptop. Around 3 p.m., Brent invited the other interns to join him for a casual debrief in the break room. Team bonding, he called it. Sable stood up to follow. Brent turned in the doorway. "You can keep working. Someone's got to keep the lights on, right?" The others laughed, unsure whether it was a joke. Sable sat down slowly, not saying a word. The hours dragged. The laughter from the break room echoed down the hall. When they returned, Austin, one of the interns, offered Sable a cookie from the tray. Brent snatched it from his hand. "We don't reward absenteeism," he said. "This one's for the team." Austin looked embarrassed. Sable looked straight ahead. At 5:30, the interns were dismissed. Brent clapped his hands once. Not bad for a first day, folks. Except for some confusion earlier. He looked at Sable pointedly. "Let's make sure everyone stays in their lane tomorrow, yeah?" The others shuffled out quietly. Sable remained seated until the floor emptied. She gathered her bag, walked past Brent's office without looking in, and made her way to the exit. The following Monday, Sable Morton arrived at her desk by 7:45 a.m., dressed in a crisp navy blouse and slacks, clutching a thermal cup of tea. Despite the degrading start to her internship, she refused to show the cracks forming beneath her quiet resolve. The conference room incident still rang in her ears, the laughter from her peers a haunting echo, but she knew that how she handled the weeks ahead would define her future. So she focused. She logged into her terminal, or rather, she tried. Her credentials didn't work. After 3 attempts, the system locked her out. A red pop-up blinked. "Access denied. Please contact IT." She waited, hesitant to draw attention, but after half an hour passed and she still couldn't access any of the project portals. She flagged down a passing junior analyst and quietly asked where the IT office was. He pointed her toward the 38th floor. Sable took the stairs. Inside IT, a distracted technician named Derek looked at her badge and frowned. "You've been flagged for limited access," he muttered, scrolling. "Not sure why. Your permissions were revoked on Friday." She blinked, confused. "Revoked by who?" Derek kept typing. It says it was requested by your direct manager, Brent Callahan." Sable's heart dropped. "Could you reinstate it?" she asked. "You'd have to get approval from him first," Derek replied. Not unkindly, but with the weariness of someone who didn't want to get involved. Sable thanked him and headed back upstairs, trying to compose herself. Brent's door was open, as always, like a lion waiting for someone to step into his territory. She knocked softly. "Mr. Callahan? My system access is." Brent raised his hand before she could finish. "I know," he said. "I had them suspended temporarily. We've decided to adjust your onboarding." Sable frowned slightly. "May I ask why?" He stood up and walked around his desk, pretending to straighten the buttons on his cuff. "Let's be honest, Morton. You're not exactly hitting the ground running. I don't want you drowning in spreadsheets until I know you can swim in water first." His smile was razor sharp. "So, we're going to ease you into things. You'll be shadowing admin for now. Clerical support." Sable wanted to speak, to clarify, to argue, but she caught the glint in his eye, the way he hovered just a little too close to the line without stepping over it. Instead, she nodded. Understood. But the sabotage didn't stop there. That afternoon, while seated at the lone auxiliary desk in the hallway just outside the copier room, Sable overheard 2 employees chatting near the water cooler. "Did you see Brent's email about the Monday strategy session?" one asked. "Yeah, only the core team's invited." He cut the intern list down to just Trevor and Austin. Sable's breath caught. She checked her inbox. Nothing. She scrolled again. No invitation. Curious, she typed in the meeting code she'd learned during orientation. Access denied. She refreshed. Same result. A sinking feeling settled in her gut. Brent had manually removed her from the staff distribution list. By late afternoon, She was walking the floor, delivering internal memos, printouts, not digital. Each time she stepped into a pod or cluster of desks, people looked up and quickly looked away. Some offered half smiles. Others ignored her completely. One intern, Austin, glanced at her, then back to his screen. "Brent's got you on mail duty now," he asked. "That's rough." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. At 4:30, as the office began its slow descent into end-of-day chatter, Sable passed Brent's glass-walled office and caught a glimpse of him standing before a group of mid-level managers. They laughed about something as he tapped on a whiteboard. Then his voice, loud and clear, cut through the wall. "Let's not waste time including everyone on the call next week. The quota girl doesn't need to be in the room anyway." Laughter erupted again. Sable froze just outside the conference area, paralyzed. The blood drained from her face. A second later, one of the execs noticed her and quickly turned his eyes to the floor. Brent didn't flinch. He didn't look at her. He just kept talking. She made it to the restroom before the tears started, locking herself in a stall and covering her mouth with her hand as her shoulders shook. No one else was inside. She let herself cry, just a little, just enough to get it out. Then she splashed her face, fixed her hair, reapplied her lip balm, and walked back out like nothing had happened. By Friday, she had been assigned to sort archived legal documents. Again, Brent's assistant handed her a folder with minimal instruction. "They need these cross-referenced and relabeled." He said to let you get your sea legs before tackling more responsibility. She sat in the basement storage area, her laptop still without access, her email still silent. On the wall beside her, someone had scrawled a message years ago in faded Sharpie. "They don't care about you." She stared at it for a long time. On her way out that evening, she passed a cleaning lady named Yara, who had smiled at her every day that week without fail. Yara paused and looked at her. "You okay, Mija?" she asked gently. Sable paused, swallowed, then gave a nod that said both yes and no at the same time. She didn't need to be told she was being excluded. The silence said enough. It wasn't just the assignments Brent had sabotaged. It was the atmosphere he created around her, the narrative he crafted with his tone, smirks, and well-placed jokes that made her an outsider. On Monday morning, Brent arrived late to the intern stand-up, coffee in hand, tie loosened like a man who never feared reprimand. He greeted Trevor and Austin with backslaps and loud jokes before glancing briefly at Sable. "Morton," he said dryly, "hope admin taught you to alphabetize last week." Then, with a dramatic sigh, he added, "Though I'm not sure how useful that'll be long-term. We don't have a file room on the executive floor." The group chuckled. Sable kept her eyes down. When Brent assigned the team to research Q3 client summaries, he split the leads evenly between Trevor and Austin, then tossed a thick envelope of old HR printouts on Sable's desk. "You can do a deep dive on employee ID retention policy. Real edge-of-your-seat stuff," he quipped as he walked off. No one said a word. By noon, Sable had gone through 36 pages of outdated onboarding forms. As the other interns packed up for lunch, chatting and comparing favorite ramen spots, Brent leaned against his doorframe, arms crossed. "Hey," he said loudly, catching everyone's attention. "Just a heads up, break room's full." Then, with a smile directed squarely at Sable, he added, "Mailroom's open though. Great view of a loading dock. You'll love it." There was an awkward silence, a few suppressed snickers, and then the group dispersed. Sable stared at him for a second, trying to decipher if he expected her to laugh along. When she didn't, he shrugged and walked away. The message was clear: stay in your place. She carried her sandwich and notebook to the narrow mailroom at the rear of the building. There, wedged between filing cabinets and outdated shipping boxes, she sat on a steel folding chair and ate in silence, her phone buzzing occasionally with notifications she didn't check. The room was cold and smelled faintly of old paper and dust, but it was private. At least here, no one looked at her like a mistake. The next morning, the department held its bi-weekly Collaborative Synergy workshop, a thinly veiled name for a team-building day meant to boost morale. A hired facilitator, bright-eyed and wearing a colorful scarf, greeted everyone with an exhausting level of enthusiasm. "Today," she chirped, "you'll be divided into teams to design the ideal startup company. Groups were pre-assigned. Trevor and Austin landed with a trio of friendly junior associates. Sable, however, found herself grouped with 3 analysts who barely nodded when she introduced herself. Probably a glitch in the randomizer, one of them muttered, already looking bored. The game began. Brent drifted around the room like a warden rather than a leader, pausing at each group to observe, comment, or toss in a sarcastic remark. When he reached Sable's group, he snorted. "Oh wow, dream team over here," he said, voice raised so others could hear. "What's the business plan? Government funding and hope?" Her teammates laughed, more out of discomfort than humor, and turned their backs. Sable remained seated, her expression calm. After the exercise, the facilitator announced a surprise. Lunch and games in the lounge, catered and casual. Everyone followed the scent of barbecue sliders and soda into the brightly lit break room. Tables were filled with food, colorful plates, and a row of games stacked in a corner. But as people dug in, Brent clapped his hands. "Hold up," he called out. "We've got a mess from the last session. Papers everywhere. We need someone to clean it up before the next group uses the space." His eyes landed on Sable without hesitation. "Morton, think you can handle that? You've got the most experience in janitorial protocol." Laughter erupted from the room. Sable's hand clenched around the back of a plastic chair, but she said nothing. Her chest burned, her stomach twisted, but she gave a silent nod and turned back toward the conference room. Papers were strewn across tables and floors, printouts, empty coffee cups, markers left open and drying out. She spent the next 15 minutes clearing it all, while everyone else played Jenga, told stories, and laughed in the next room. As she returned the last chair to its place, she heard Brent's voice filter through the open door. "Better get used to this kind of work," he was saying. "She's not exactly boardroom material." A fresh wave of laughter followed. That night, she went home without saying goodbye. She rode the bus in silence, her reflection in the window looking almost unfamiliar. By the time she reached her apartment, she didn't feel tired. She felt invisible. At 21 years old, after years of excelling in school, grinding through internships, and earning accolades on merit, she was now being treated like a cautionary tale in a place that claimed to reward ambition. She opened her laptop and began searching for something she hadn't thought she'd need: documentation. She noted the dates, times, incidents, what was said, by whom, who was present. Every comment, every exclusion, every public jab. She didn't know if anyone would ever read it. She didn't know if it would matter, but she knew it needed to exist. She hadn't received a real assignment in over 10 days. Her email access was still filtered, her meetings still limited, and her seat still remained at the auxiliary desk near the copier, a physical reminder that she didn't belong in Brent Callahan's world. But today, something was different. An email arrived just after 9 a.m., marked urgent, and flagged by Brent's assistant. Sable was summoned to attend a midday department-wide strategy briefing on fiscal modeling, a session usually reserved for analysts and full-time employees. It was unexpected, but she saw it as a sliver of opportunity. She grabbed her notes, checked her numbers twice, and took a deep breath. The conference room was already full when she arrived. At least 20 people sat around the massive table, others standing along the walls. Brent lounged near the front, sipping from a stainless steel tumbler as he tapped something into his phone. When he looked up and saw her, his expression flattened. She sat near the back, opened her notebook, and focused. Midway through the meeting, the conversation turned to forecasting errors from the prior quarter. The senior associate presenting asked if anyone had suggestions for improving the projection framework. Sable raised her hand, steady and composed. "I think the variance stems from over-reliance on blended assumptions," she said clearly. "If we isolate variable cost trends over a rolling 5-month cycle and cross-check against seasonal marketing shifts, we'll reduce the margin by at least 2 points." The room fell quiet for a beat. The logic was sharp. The numbers were clean. Brent straightened in his chair, smiling tightly. "Interesting," he said, drawing out the word like he was tasting something sour. "Except that's not how we do things here. We don't throw around theories without knowing the context, and we certainly don't interrupt with half-baked models." Sable blinked, confused. She had waited to speak, answered the question directly, and offered valid insight. She tried to respond, but Brent raised his voice. "And let's cool it with the aggression, okay? This is a collaborative environment." Heads turned. Murmurs began. One woman near the front whispered something to the man beside her. "Aggression." Sable repeated, quieter now. "I was just answering a question." Brent's tone sharpened. "Don't make it a thing, Morton. You're a guest in this room. Show some restraint." Sable went silent. Her stomach turned. The word hung in the air, aggressive. It echoed in her ears, louder than it had been spoken. The meeting continued without her. No one looked her way again. That afternoon, as she sat at her desk attempting to complete the limited paperwork she'd been given, a ping sounded from her inbox. It was from Brent. "Please meet me in my office ASAP. Close the door behind you." She stood, braced herself, and walked in. Brent was at his desk, relaxed, scrolling through his phone. Without looking up, he said, "I've been getting some feedback that you're unstable." Sable stared at him. "Unstable?" she asked. He looked up slowly, his expression blank. "Emotional, difficult to work with, disruptive in meetings." She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "I answer a question, respectfully, professionally." Brent shrugged. "That's not how it felt to others. You come off intense, defensive. You need to work on your tone if you want to make it here." Sable clenched her hands. "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't interrupt. I contributed a solution." Brent leaned forward. "Look, I'm just trying to help. You're digging yourself into a hole. There's a perception problem. Fix it before it becomes permanent." Then he dismissed her with a flick of his fingers. Sable walked back to her desk in a haze. She wanted to scream, but she couldn't. She wanted to cry, but she refused. Instead, she opened her journal and wrote everything down. The words, the phrasing, the tone, the witnesses. Every piece of it. Later that evening, as the office thinned out, Sable stayed late, finishing a case summary she had been working on independently. An analysis on brand equity decay for a retail client, which had been circulated internally as an optional project for interns to tackle. She had pored over the data for days, run her own regressions, and written a detailed 3-page memo with charts and recommendations. She sent it directly to the internship coordinator and CC'd Brent, hoping it might remind someone she was capable of more. The next morning, she arrived to Whispers. Austin, sitting with Trevor in the corner of the break room, gave her a pitying glance. "You okay?" he asked when she passed. "Why wouldn't I be?" she replied. "No reason," he said too quickly. Her inbox dinged again. This time it was from the director of the internship program. "Please schedule a time to speak." Confused, Sable opened the chain beneath it. At the bottom of the thread was an email sent from Brent's account, forwarding attached memo submitted by intern Sable Morton. It appears to be lifted directly from last year's work by Derek Tran. Identical structure, same phrasing in several areas. Recommend review for plagiarism. Sable's chest tightened. Derek Tran? She didn't even know who that was. She opened the attached files. One was hers. The second was from the company archives. The formatting was similar. Headers in bold bullet points in 2 columns, but the content, the actual analysis, was completely different. Her charts were unique. Her insights were drawn from her own models. But Brent had aligned the two to suggest copying, falsely, deliberately. Her mouth went dry. He had framed her, and now it was in official records. The meeting with the director was awkward. He didn't accuse her outright, but reminded her of the company's zero-tolerance plagiarism policy and said they were looking into it. Sable sat across from him, heart pounding, voice flat. "I did that work myself. Alone." He nodded non-committally. "We'll get clarity soon." When she left the room, she could feel the eyes following her down the hallway. She hadn't received a reply to her rebuttal memo. She hadn't been given a chance to defend herself. Instead, she'd been told her presence at the Friday town hall meeting was mandatory, and that she'd be presenting a summary on marketing spend optimization, a topic she hadn't been briefed on until 6:34 p.m. the night before. The document had arrived without context, and the project had originally been assigned to Austin. but Brent had forwarded it to her with one sentence: "Make this shine for the board." It felt like a setup, and it was. She knew it, but refusing to present would give him all the ammunition he needed to discredit her permanently. She arrived early, sat alone at the corner of the main presentation room, and reviewed the files repeatedly. She rehearsed her delivery. She tightened her transitions. She adjusted the layout of her slides so the visuals were crisp, clean, and persuasive. The room slowly filled with employees, analysts, managers, coordinators, interns. Every department sent at least one representative. At the head of the room, Brent stood talking to a senior VP, laughing casually, holding his coffee like he owned the building. When his eyes met Sable's, he offered a slow smile. Not a kind one, a knowing one. The kind of smile you gave someone when you knew the trap had already been sprung. At exactly 10 a.m., the meeting began. Brent clapped his hands and welcomed everyone. "Happy Friday, team. Hope you've had a productive week. We've got a few department highlights and then a special intern-led presentation on a project you'll all be hearing more about in Q3. His tone shifted slightly as he gestured toward the projector. "Sable Morton, take it away." Sable stood, her spine straight, clutching her remote with steady fingers. She walked to the front of the room, connected her file, and cleared her throat. Her first few slides rolled by smoothly: market overview, campaign ROI, projected gains. She cited her sources, called out the analysts who had contributed data, and even acknowledged Austin for his prior research. The room was quiet, attentive. She could feel the rhythm of her words aligning with her breath, her hands moving naturally as she clicked through. And then, just as she began detailing a revised customer segmentation model, Brent cut her off. "Hold up." His voice echoed through the speaker system, halting her mid-sentence. She paused, unsure if he meant to ask a question. Brent stepped forward, waving a paper in his hand. "Where did you get this?" he asked, pointing at her screen. Sable hesitated. "That chart was based on the latest marketing analytics file, which Brent raised his voice. "You falsified these numbers. That report was never verified. You didn't clear it with analytics. You fabricated the data to make the pitch look stronger." A murmur spread through the crowd. Sable's pulse surged in her ears. "That's not true," she said carefully. The figures came directly from. Brent slammed the printed chart onto the table. "This is exactly what I warned you about. Cutting corners, making things up, and doing it in front of half the department? Unbelievable." He turned to the audience now, as if performing for them. "We bring in interns to learn, to support, to observe, not to lie their way into recognition. You're lucky we let you in the building, Morton." The room gasped. People looked away, some shifting uncomfortably, others openly staring. Sable's hands clenched at her sides. Her voice came out quiet but firm. "I didn't falsify anything. The data was in the shared folder. I cross-checked everything. You can..." Brent raised a hand like a traffic cop. "Don't double down. I'm asking you publicly to own your mistake and apologize to the team for wasting their time." The silence was deafening. Sable looked across the crowd at people she'd shared elevators with, exchanged awkward hellos with, eaten beside in the break room, and not one of them met her eyes. Brent stared her down, arms folded, jaw set. Sable took a breath. Her knees trembled, but she kept her posture upright. "I'm not going to apologize for doing my job," she said softly. "I'm not going to apologize for trying." Brent's face darkened. "So we're doing this the hard way," he muttered. Then he turned to the room and said, "Meeting adjourned. I'll handle this." People stood quickly, unsure what to do. A few lingered. A few whispered. Brent turned back to her and lowered his voice, though not quite enough. "You really don't get it, do you? You're here because someone somewhere thought we needed optics. You're a favor, not a future." He stepped back and left her standing alone in front of the blank screen. She turned slowly, unplugged the laptop, and walked back to her desk without looking up. As she passed her fellow interns, no one spoke. At her desk, she sat motionless for several minutes. Her breathing was shallow, her throat tight. The humiliation wasn't just public, it was institutional, designed, methodical. Brent hadn't just questioned her competence. He declared to an entire department that she didn't belong, and no one had stopped him. Not one person had stood up, spoken out, or pushed back. They had all watched her burn in real time. She powered off her laptop, stood up, and walked to the restroom. There, in the third stall, she broke. Silent tears streaked her face. Her hands shook. Her voice was gone. When she finally emerged, she washed her face, reapplied her lip gloss, and stared into the mirror for a long moment. She was done pretending it would get better. She had been shamed in front of a crowd, accused without evidence, and dismissed with words that still echoed in her head. "You're lucky we let you in the building." She carried with her a folder of printed documents, notes, and proof, though she hadn't yet decided who to give it to or when. What she did know was that Brent Callahan had no intention of stopping. She was no longer just someone he enjoyed mocking. She had become a target that needed to be crushed. Her presence challenged his narrative. Her intelligence contradicted his assumptions, and her resilience irritated his authority. And so he escalated. That morning, she found a sticky note on her desk, written in Brent's signature, looping cursive. "See me in conference room, C at 9 o'clock. Bring dry erase cleaner." No explanation, no context, just a command. Sable stared at it for a long moment before taking the small bottle from the supply closet and walking slowly to the room in question. Inside were 7 junior staffers, interns, coordinators, and assistants, all gathered loosely around the large whiteboard wall. Brent stood at the head of the room with his arms folded, smirking as she entered. "Perfect timing," he said loudly. "We were just admiring last week's brainstorm session. Too bad no one cleaned up afterward." He turned to her. "We need that board wiped down, top to bottom. Can't have guests thinking we're running a preschool in here." Sable blinked, her hand tightening around the bottle of cleaner. "You want me to clean it? Now." Brent chuckled. "Do you see anyone else holding the supplies?" The room erupted into awkward laughter. Some giggled nervously, others glanced away. Sable's cheeks flushed, but she didn't move. Brent's eyes narrowed. "Look, Morton, I know it's not a spreadsheet, but it's important. We all contribute in our own way. This one's yours." He gestured toward the board. "Unless, of course, you're too busy with another fake report." The jab stung like a slap. She moved forward slowly, uncapped the cleaner, and began wiping the whiteboard while Brent continued the meeting, as if nothing unusual was happening. She could feel eyes on her back, hear the quiet laughter, the whispered commentary. "Guess we know what her real internship focus is," someone muttered under their breath. "Executive sanitation specialist," another quipped. The board was large, nearly 8 feet across, and she had to stretch to reach the top corners. Her blazer tightened awkwardly as she reached, her fingers slipping slightly on the damp surface. No one offered help. No one looked away. When she finished, Brent clapped mockingly. "Beautiful. I think we found your calling." Then he turned to the group. "All right, on to the agenda. But let's remember, cleanliness is next to employability." Laughter again, this time louder. Sable returned to her seat near the door, trying to steady her breathing, hands still damp from the cleaner. She didn't look up. She didn't speak. She just endured. But Brent wasn't finished. 2 hours later, she was summoned to the executive floor, the top tier of a company, where the walls gleamed with polished wood and the carpets muffled every sound. She had never been invited up there before. As she stepped off the elevator, Brent met her in the corridor, already grinning. "Good, you're here," he said. "The quarterly planning lunch is starting. I need someone to assist with beverages and refills. Think you can handle that?" Sable froze. "You want me to serve coffee?" Brent's grin widened. "Why not? It's honest work. Besides, you're not exactly busy with anything else today, are you?" She followed him into the large boardroom, where a dozen top executives were seated around a polished oval table. Crystal glasses, gleaming silver trays, fresh catering. It was a kind of room where real decisions happened, where strategies were forged. And there she was, standing in the corner with a tray in her hands. Brent whispered instructions as he pointed to each executive. "That one takes his black. That one wants tea with lemon. And don't spill anything. We're not insured for dignity loss." She moved mechanically, passing cups and trays, trying to avoid eye contact. But her fingers trembled slightly, and when she poured for the VP of Marketing, a drop of coffee splashed on the saucer. Brent saw it and made a show of wiping it up with a napkin, smirking. "Careful," he said. "Wouldn't want to mess up another presentation." Her throat tightened. Her eyes burned. She focused on the tray, on her movements, on the rhythm of each step. But the humiliation built like a storm inside her chest. She wasn't an intern anymore. She was a servant, a prop, a joke. One executive, a woman in her 50s with a silver streak in her hair, watched Sable with a puzzled expression. She didn't laugh. She didn't smirk. When Sable poured her tea, the woman leaned forward slightly and whispered, "Are you all right?" Sable blinked and nodded quickly, unable to speak. She turned away, and the first tear slipped down her cheek. She finished the service and stood in the corner until the meeting ended. When it did, she returned the tray to the kitchen and walked into the nearest restroom. This time, she didn't cry. This time, she looked into the mirror and saw someone she barely recognized. A woman stripped of dignity, drained of energy, her fire reduced to embers. But beneath that, something hardened, something ancient, the refusal to vanish. Her face was composed, unreadable. She walked past Brent's office without flinching, even as he smirked behind his glass walls. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His silence now carried the weight of a victor's arrogance. For weeks, he had controlled the narrative. He had stripped her of assignments, dignity, inclusion, and now, he believed, hope. But Sable carried something he didn't see, something layered under her calm exterior and guarded posture: strategy. The night before, she had finished organizing her documents, categorized by incident, date, and corresponding witness. Her file was bulletproof, her notebook damning. Her next move had been simple. One phone call, no long explanation, no emotion, just 2 words: "It's time." The voice on the other end had paused, then simply said, "Understood." She had made the call from the rooftop of her apartment building, the city lights sprawling out around her like a network of nerves. And now, inside the corporate shell that had worked to shrink her down to nothing, she moved with quiet precision. Brent had one more move left to play. She knew it, and he did not disappoint. By 10 a.m., a note appeared on her desk, again in his handwriting. "Need coffee and pastries set up in conference room B. VIP visitors. Keep out of sight after." No signature, no smiley face, just orders. She read it without expression. Then, like always, she obeyed. She rolled the catering cart down the corridor, her footsteps silent over the plush gray carpet. Inside conference room B, she arranged the silver carafes, cups, napkins, and trays of croissants like a seasoned concierge. She wiped down the table's edge, double-checked the creamers, and then quietly retreated to the corner. The door opened. Brent walked in first, casual and cocky. Behind him trailed several mid-level executives. They all laughed at something he said, until another figure stepped into the room, and the air changed. The laughter stopped. The room straightened. The CEO of Danvers Rex Global, Vivian Langford, stood at 5'8" in heels and walked like someone who didn't ask permission. Her tailored black dress was impeccable, her presence like gravity. Brent's demeanor shifted visibly, shoulders back, smile wide. "Vivian," he said smoothly, "what a surprise. We weren't expecting you until Thursday." Vivian gave a polite nod. "Change of plans. I wanted to get a feel for the intern program in person." Her eyes swept the room once, clinically. "Where are the summer analysts stationed today?" Brent cleared his throat. "They're working on department-specific projects. I've been overseeing their progress directly. We've kept things focused." Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly, as if parsing truth from air. Then she turned her head and saw Sable. For the first time since she'd entered the company, someone of power looked at her with recognition. Not confusion, not suspicion, recognition. Vivian's expression softened instantly. "Sable," she said. Her voice cut through the room like glass breaking. The executives turned. Brent blinked. "Excuse me," he asked. But Vivian had already crossed the room. She stopped in front of Sable, extended both arms, and pulled her into a firm, heartfelt embrace. "I've missed you," she said quietly. "You okay?" Sable nodded once. Her throat tightened, but she kept her posture strong. "Yes, ma'am." The room was frozen in shock. Brent's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Vivian turned back to the others. "Gentlemen, this is Sable Morton. She's part of a special internal review initiative I commissioned personally. She's not just an intern, she's my goddaughter." The words landed like a dropped bomb. Brent's face drained of color. One executive stepped back, visibly shaken. The atmosphere flipped in an instant from casual superiority to brutal panic. "She's been embedded across departments to observe culture, leadership, and compliance," Vivian continued, her voice now cool and sharp. "Her findings will inform upcoming restructuring decisions. I trust everyone's treated her with the respect and support our values demand." Brent stammered. I wasn't informed of any review, ma'am." "There was no." Vivian raised a hand. "That was intentional. Authenticity matters. And it seems we've uncovered quite a bit." She turned to Sable. "Is there anything you'd like to share now?" Sable looked directly at Brent. Her gaze was calm, unwavering. "Not yet," she said quietly, "but soon." Vivian smiled and nodded. "Good. I'll look forward to your report." She turned back to the table, poured herself a coffee, and took a croissant. "For now, I think I'd like to speak with Sable privately. Brent, would you give us a moment?" He opened his mouth, then thought better of it. Brent Callahan stood rigid in the hallway, flanked by two department heads, his jaw tight. His skin flushed a shade paler than usual. His confident demeanor from earlier that morning had evaporated, replaced with a nervous energy he failed to mask. He kept glancing at the closed door, straining to hear what was being said inside, though the walls kept their secrets. Behind those doors, Sable sat across from Vivian, her notebook open, documents spread across the table. She laid out everything. The dates, the comments, the emails, the humiliations, each piece methodically placed like evidence in a courtroom. Vivian listened without interrupting, her eyes focused, expression unreadable. When Sable finished, the room fell silent. Then Vivian reached into her tote and pulled out a sleek black case. From inside it, she retrieved a small USB drive. "I hoped I wouldn't need this," she said softly, "but I see I was wrong." An hour later, at exactly 2 p.m., a building-wide alert was sent to all departments. Executive briefing, main atrium, 2:15 sharp. Attendance mandatory. Employees poured out of offices and workspaces, confused but intrigued. Brent, standing near the back, tried to blend in, his collar slightly damp with sweat. Sable stood near the front with Vivian, calm and composed. The entire leadership team arrived shortly after, looking unsettled. When Vivian took the microphone, the room fell into silence. "Thank you all for gathering," she said, her voice carrying clear and direct. "What I'm about to share will redefine how we move forward as a company." She gestured toward the screen behind her. 3 months ago, I initiated a confidential leadership and inclusivity audit to assess the integrity of our team culture. That audit took the form of an internship, assigned to a candidate placed into one of our most visible yet vulnerable positions. She turned and nodded towards Sable. That in turn was my daughter. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Brent's eyes widened, his hands twitching at his sides. Someone behind him muttered, "Daughter." Vivian continued without flinching. "I chose not to publicize her identity to avoid special treatment and to ensure that what she experienced was honest and unfiltered. What she encountered was not only a failure of leadership, but a betrayal of our core values." She pulled out the USB drive and handed it to the AV technician. "You won't have to take our word for it." The screen came alive with the video. Hidden camera footage, grainy but clear, captured sound and visuals from various points throughout the office. The first clip showed Brent mocking Sable's outfit in the intern orientation. "Didn't know housekeeping checked in this early," he'd said. Laughter echoed. The next clip, him assigning her to scrub the whiteboard. "We all contribute in our own way. This one's yours." Then, the damning scene, him in the town hall, sneering in front of half the company. You're lucky we let you in the building." The room was stone silent. Some people looked horrified. Others looked ashamed. A few buried their faces in their hands. The final clip showed Brent whispering to a colleague, unaware of the nearby mic. "She's just here to make us look diverse. Once the summer's over, she'll disappear like the rest of them." As the video ended, Vivian stepped forward again. "Let me be perfectly clear," she said. "This is not a conversation. This is an action." She turned toward Brent. "Effective immediately, Brent Callahan, you are terminated from your position at Danvers Rex Global. You will be escorted off the premises. Your access to all systems is revoked, and your severance has been frozen pending internal investigation." Security approached from the side. Brent raised his hands, stammering. "Wait, I didn't know who she was. This isn't." Vivian cut him off. "You didn't need to know who she was. You needed to respect who she is. And you failed." The guards flanked him, motioning him toward the exit. Brent turned to the crowd, scanning for support, but found only blank stares. Co-workers he'd joked with, managers he'd leaned on, analysts who had once laughed at his cruel humor. All avoided his eyes now. There was no one left to save him. As he passed by Sable, he paused, mouth half open. She met his gaze, unflinching. He didn't say a word. Then he was gone. Vivian returned to the microphone. To those who watched this happen, said nothing, and now feel the weight of their silence. "I hope this moment marks the beginning of change. We will be reviewing leadership conduct across all departments. Promotions are frozen. Performance reviews are reopened. And any retaliation going forward will be grounds for dismissal." She turned to Sable and gave her a soft smile. "Thank you for your strength." Sable nodded, holding her chin high. Around the room, employees stood still, unsure what to say. One woman clapped, then another. Soon the room erupted in quiet applause, not loud or performative, but honest. A few people looked toward Sable with awe, some with shame, and some with understanding. In the aftermath, the energy on the floor shifted palpably. The glass walls that had felt like cages now gleamed with possibility. Co-workers who had once ignored her now approached gently, offering nods, thank yous, and even apologies. Sable received none with resentment, only quiet acknowledgement. Her work was not yet done, but the power had shifted. The following morning began not with the usual buzz of keyboards and murmured phone calls, but with a stillness that settled over the Danvers Rex global offices like fog. People arrived at their desks quieter than usual, exchanging looks more often than words. The previous day's announcement had landed like a tectonic shift, appending what many thought they understood about the company, their colleagues, and their own roles in a culture that had allowed someone like Brent Callahan to flourish unchecked. The air was dense with the awareness that nothing would be the same. Sable Morton sat at her usual desk, not the auxiliary one near the copier, but a temporary station arranged just outside the executive wing, where she had been invited to work while the leadership team finalized their report. She wore the same calm expression she'd maintained since the start, but now it was no longer misread as passivity. Now people looked at her with respect, or at least with careful acknowledgement. She had endured humiliation with grace, gathered evidence with precision, and brought down a man who had made it his mission to degrade her. At 10:02 a.m., the elevator to the east hallway dinged, and two uniformed security officers stepped out, followed closely by Brent Callahan. He was wearing the same gray suit from the day before, but now his shirt was rumpled, his tie gone, and his face pale. His eyes darted nervously around the room as he held a single cardboard box filled with his personal items, a desk plaque, a coffee mug, a framed photo of a fishing trip, and a pen holder shaped like a golf club. Every desk he passed turned slightly in his direction. Some people looked away, others didn't. No one spoke, no one laughed. A few cell phones were raised discreetly. Brent kept his head down. His once arrogant stride had reduced to a shuffle. His reign had ended not with applause or defiance, but with silence. As he passed Sable, his steps slowed. She looked up, their eyes locking for a fraction of a second. She said nothing. Neither did he. Then he continued toward the doors. It was over. Within hours, HR issued a company-wide email outlining the next steps. The language was measured but clear: a comprehensive audit of all department leadership, third-party interviews with all interns and junior staff, suspension of several managers pending review, and the launch of a new Equity and Ethics Committee reporting directly to Vivian Langford. A second memo detailed new training requirements on workplace conduct, bias awareness, and managerial accountability, to be completed within 2 weeks. But the real waves came not from the formal statements, but from what unfolded behind closed doors. Several of Brent's closest colleagues, those who had laughed at his jokes, excluded Sable from meetings, or simply looked the other way, were summoned to HR over the course of the day. Some were seen leaving conference rooms red-faced. A senior analyst who had once joked that Sable should be grateful to have a seat near the copier was placed on administrative leave. 2 interns who had mimicked Brent's behavior began clearing out their desks before noon. One manager who had routinely CC'd Brent but never responded to Sable's emails submitted his resignation before lunchtime. The message was clear: complicity was no longer invisible. Throughout it all, Sable remained composed. She did not gloat. She did not seek out apologies or recognition. She answered questions when asked, offered notes when requested, and maintained her dignity. Her restraint made her statement all the more powerful. During a mid-afternoon meeting with the new interim HR director and the board's oversight liaison, she was asked if she would be comfortable speaking at an upcoming town hall about her experience. She paused for a moment, then nodded. "Not to tell my story," she said, "but to tell theirs, the people who couldn't speak." Elsewhere, in the corner of a small apartment on the edge of the city, Brent sat alone on his couch, his phone silent, his inbox deactivated. He had been escorted out of the building he once ruled. His contacts no longer returned his calls. His network, once built on shared ego and backdoor favors, had vanished the moment he lost his badge access. The severance he'd once boasted about at happy hours had been frozen, pending internal findings. But perhaps most damning was the reflection he saw on the television screen when it was turned off. His own face, tired, strained, lined with confusion and the first shadows of shame. Later that week, Danvers Rex held its weekly leadership meeting, this time live-streamed to all employees. Vivian stood at the front again, this time flanked by the chair of the board and 2 new directors, both women of color, both promoted ahead of schedule as part of the structural shift. "We cannot undo what was allowed to happen under our roof," she said clearly, "but we can ensure it is never allowed again. To those who were silent, your silence had a cost. To those who spoke or acted too late, let that be your lesson. To those who suffered, we see you now." 3 months after the public unraveling of Brent Callahan's career, the pace of Danvers Rex Global had changed in subtle but undeniable ways. The culture was no longer one of whispers and hierarchies. It had begun transforming into something transparent, intentional, and aware. Compliance officers now walked the halls alongside interns instead of peering down at them from glass-paneled offices. Sable Morton, once seen as a misplaced intern, now held a formal title, Junior Strategic Development Advisor, personally appointed by Vivian Langford after an exhaustive review of her reports and insight. Her rise had not come as an act of charity or appeasement, but as recognition of earned capability. She now spoke regularly in leadership meetings, contributed to cultural shift panels, and reviewed reports for the Equity and Ethics Committee. People listened when she spoke. Her ideas were credited to her name, and the interns who came in after her walked taller, spoke more freely, and asked for more, because they had seen what courage looked like and what truth could yield. But beyond the walls of that gleaming office tower, the man whose cruelty had once dominated the atmosphere had been reduced to a cautionary tale. Brent Callahan lived in a modest 3rd floor walk-up now, a far cry from the Riverview condo he had once bragged about. Gone were the tailored suits and executive lounges, the brunches with department heads, and the drinks charged to expense accounts. What remained was silence, long days, and the slow, uncomfortable realization that what he had called leadership was, in fact, a mask for insecurity and inherited arrogance. At first, he blamed everyone but himself. He stewed over betrayals, convinced that the world had turned on him unfairly. But over time, slowly, painfully, that narrative crumbled. There was no inbox filled with calls to join new firms. No mentors reaching out to pull him back into the fold. His former peers had either distanced themselves or rewritten their own history to omit their support of him. Alone with his thoughts and an ever-growing sense of regret, he began to reflect not just on what he had lost, but on who he had been. It started with a conversation at a local community center. He had stopped by on a whim, searching for volunteer work to keep from drowning in the stillness of his new life. The director, a woman named Janice, who ran the center like a fortress of discipline and compassion, had asked about his background. He'd hesitated, then told the truth. "I used to run a department," he said quietly. "I failed. Badly." She'd nodded once. "Then maybe you're ready to help someone else avoid the same mistake." That day, she handed him a clipboard and assigned him to the Youth Career Readiness Program. His job was simple: help teens with resume writing, mock interviews, and goal setting. At first, they distrusted him, his corporate tone too polished, his posture too rigid. But as weeks passed, he learned to listen. He stopped talking about what he used to do and started asking what they wanted to become. One kid named Marcus reminded him of a younger version of himself: brash, impatient, hungry. But unlike Brent, Marcus had no network, no safety net. Brent helped him craft a resume and secure an internship at a logistics firm. When Marcus came back 2 weeks later wearing a collared shirt and beaming, something shifted inside Brent. That night, he stayed late organizing materials for the next session. He no longer moved like a man chasing power. He moved like someone trying to rebuild something, perhaps not just his reputation, but his soul. He spoke less and listened more. He stopped excusing his past and started owning it. The transformation wasn't instant, but it was real. And it carried him forward slowly into something resembling peace. One Saturday in early spring, the community center held a partnership fair with local businesses and leaders. Danvers Rex was one of the sponsors, part of its ongoing outreach to support underserved communities. Sable was invited to represent the company and speak on a panel about leadership and resilience. She arrived in a dark green blazer, a stack of handouts in her bag, and a calm presence that turned heads. She greeted the panelists, shook hands with the director, and set up her materials. She was midway through her opening remarks when she saw him. He stood in the back, slightly hunched, wearing a clean but faded button-up shirt and khakis. His face looked older, wearier, but also quieter. He watched her not with bitterness, but with something closer to humility. When the panel ended and the crowd began to disperse, Brent lingered. Sable approached slowly, her expression unreadable. "Ms. Morton," he said, voice low, "I didn't know you'd be here. I didn't come for you. I work here now. I help with the youth program." She looked at him carefully. "I know," she said. "I saw your name on the volunteer list." He nodded once, unsure what else to say. Then, after a long pause, he added, "I never apologized. Not really. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I've been trying to change. Not because I lost everything, but because I finally understand what I was doing. What I cost people. What I almost cost you." His voice trembled slightly. "You didn't deserve any of it." Sable studied him for a moment, searching his face for signs of performance, of self-pity. She saw none, only the faint glow of someone beginning to grasp the truth. "Keep doing better," she said quietly. "Not for me, for them." She gestured toward the group of teens laughing across the room. Brent nodded, eyes moist. "I will." She turned and walked away, her steps firm, her spine straight. Brent remained where he stood, watching the young people he now mentored, their energy, their fire, their hunger. For the first time in his life, he wasn't at the center. And for the first time, he didn't want to be. Back at Danvers Rex, Sable continued building something far more powerful than a personal victory. She built bridges between departments, between interns and leaders, between truth and accountability. Her presence in meetings was a reminder not just of what had happened, but of what had been made possible through integrity and resilience. She never raised her voice. She never demanded retribution. She simply led, steadily, thoughtfully, and without compromise. One afternoon, a new intern, a young black woman named Raina, asked her how she handled everything that had happened. Sable smiled softly and said, "Sometimes the world tries to make you small. You just have to remember who you are and make sure they do too." Raina nodded, inspired. It was a message passed down like armor. The story of Sable Morton and Brent Callahan would live on in company orientation programs, in training manuals, and whispered warnings. But more importantly, it lived in the way people began to treat each other. With more care, more awareness, more courage, justice had been served. And from that justice, something better had begun to grow. The end. If you found this story powerful and meaningful, consider supporting it by liking and subscribing. It helps bring more stories like this to life, stories that matter, stories that challenge, and stories that leave an impact. What did you think about the plot? Did any moments stand out or hit close to home? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And where are you watching from? Drop a comment and let me know. I read every one.